picture this for a second. You are standing in a freezing, snow-covered line right outside a prison in Moscow.
Oh, wow. Okay. Setting the scene right away.
Yeah, we're going right into it. So it's the height of the Stalinist era. You are exhausted, you're starving, and you are surrounded by hundreds of other women.
And I imagine they are all just waiting for any kind of news.
Exactly. Waiting day after day, week after week, just hoping to catch a single glimpse of their family members, people who have been locked up for, imaginary crimes.
The psychological weight of that, I mean, it must be entirely crushing.
Totally crushing. And on one particularly brutal morning, a woman standing next to you turns, looks you dead in the eye, and gives you this direct, almost impossible command.
What does she say?
She says, "You must tell others what is happening here. The world must know this."
Wow. And the woman receiving that command, that was the Russian poet Anne Akhmatova, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which is just, I mean, what you're describing is basically the genesis of one of the most powerful pieces of literature of the 20th century.
It really is.
Because she took this infinite, paralyzing chaos of state terror and human suffering, and she had to somehow figure out how to structure it.
Right, like how do you even begin to process that?
You have to build it into something that could actually be communicated, something that would survive the era.
And that strikes right at the heart of what we are doing in this deep dive today.
Definitely.
Because whether you are a poet trying to document a historical tragedy, or maybe you're a clinical leader tasked with overhauling a failing healthcare system.
Or even just sitting at your desk right now staring at a blank screen.
Yes, feeling completely crushed by the sheer scale of a complex problem at work, you are facing the exact same human dilemma.
How do you take the raw, unorganized chaos, all that data and emotion, and turn it into something structured, impactful, and undeniable?
That is the big question.
It's the ultimate challenge, really, of translating intent into reality. I mean, we see brilliant ideas just die on the vine every single day.
Oh, all the time.
And it's usually because the person holding the idea couldn't build that bridge between the raw concept in their head and the actual physical execution out in the real world.
So, to solve that mystery today, we are pulling from a really fascinating collision of sources.
Yeah, it's a bit of an eclectic mix this time.
It is. We are looking at these deeply analytical clinical nursing texts that focus on quality improvement and theoretical frameworks.
Which sounds very dry, but I promise it's not.
Right, because we are smashing them together with profound reflections on the visceral, emotional craft of writing.
Because it turns out, the clinical researcher trying to reduce hospital infection rates and the creative writer trying to break your heart are actually using the exact same underlying mechanics.
They really are. So let's unpack this. To build that bridge out of chaos, we have to start with what holds the whole thing together.
We need to talk about invisible scaffolding.
Right. When you are staring at that massive, undefined project, your first instinct is usually just to start doing things, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Start typing, start pulling data, make some phone calls.
Which is a recipe for total misalignment.
Total disaster, yeah.
Yeah.
Action without a framework is just noise.
So the clinical sources we're examining introduce this foundational concept called the project triangle.
And it seems rudimentary at first glance, like almost too simple.
But it is actually a ruthless diagnostic tool.
It really is. So the 3 points of this triangle are purpose, methods, and outcomes.
Okay, purpose, methods, outcomes.
Right. And the theoretical framework of your project is basically the invisible scaffolding that draws the straight logical lines connecting those 3 points.
And if those three things don't connect perfectly, what happens?
The entire structure collapses. I mean, you might have a brilliant, world-changing purpose, let's say, improving the mental health of teenagers in your school district.
Okay, great purpose, very necessary.
But if your methods consist of handing out like a 50-page black and white pamphlet,
Which no teenager is ever going to read.
exactly. And then your outcomes are measured by how many pamphlets were just taken from a table in the hallway.
Oh, man. Yeah, you don't have a triangle.
You have 3 disjointed lines floating in space. Your method completely fails to support your purpose.
Because picking up a pamphlet doesn't mean their mental health improved.
Right. And your outcome measurement tells you absolutely nothing about the actual mental health of the teenagers. The project fails before it even begins.
So a framework prevents that kind of structural failure.
It forces you to define exactly what you are doing and, honestly, equally importantly, what you are not doing.
Let's look at this on a massive scale, because I know framework can easily sound like dry academic jargon.
Yeah, it's one of those words that makes people's eyes glaze over.
But think about the sheer paralyzing impossibility of trying to improve healthcare in the United States.
Oh, if your boss handed you that project, your brain would just completely shut down.
Right. The scope is way too large. It is pure chaos.
It's diagnostic muddy waters. There's nowhere to grab onto.
But in 2011, the Department of Health and Human Services released something called the National Quality Strategy, or the NQS.
And this wasn't just a list of tasks. It was a massive overarching framework.
It immediately established boundaries by identifying 3 specific aims, right?
Yeah, the aims were better care, affordable care, and healthy people in communities.
Okay, so that narrows it down a bit.
It does. And then it provided the scaffolding beneath those aims via 6 priorities.
And these were highly specific vectors, like reducing harm associated with healthcare and engaging people and families in their own care.
And the moment that framework is applied, the paralyzing chaos kind of just disappears.
Because you are no longer trying to boil the ocean and just vaguely fix healthcare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are specifically designing a protocol to, say, engage families in post-operative care. The framework makes the impossible actionable.
It acts entirely like a camera lens.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
If you are standing in front of a sprawling mountain range and you use a wide-angle lens, you capture the entire majestic environment.
But the specific hiker on the trail gets totally lost in the background.
Exactly. But if you swap that out for a macro lens, your focus is incredibly tight on the hiker's boots.
But then the context of the mountain is cut out entirely.
Yeah. Neither your lens is wrong, but the lens you choose fundamentally dictates what picture you walk away with.
And that perfectly illustrates the most critical function of a framework. It defines your concepts.
Because words can mean wildly different things to different people.
Exactly. Like if your project goal is to improve patient teaching, that phrase is completely meaningless until a framework defines it.
Right, because teaching to one person might mean standing at a whiteboard giving a dry lecture.
And to another person, it means sitting in a circle, sharing personal experiences.
So the framework is the deciding factor there.
Precisely. If your chosen framework defines teaching as teacher-centered, your entire project is going to focus on the clarity of the information being delivered.
Like the volume of data or how much expertise the instructor has.
Right. But if your framework defines teaching as learner-centered, the focus completely shifts.
It shifts to the patient's active comprehension, right?
Yeah, their comprehension, their cultural background, how they actually integrate that knowledge into their daily life.
And the measurement tools for those 2 approaches are entirely incompatible.
Completely. If you are operating under a learner-centered framework, but your end-of-project survey only asks the instructor, how many minutes did you spend talking at the patient?
You've shattered the project triangle again.
You've completely shattered it. You are measuring a teacher-centered metric in a learner-centered project.
So how do you even know if you've got the right framework? I assume you have to evaluate it before you begin.
Evaluating your framework before you begin is absolutely non-negotiable. Our sources lay out very specific evaluation criteria for this invisible scaffolding.
Okay, what are the criteria?
First, you have to evaluate the scope. Like you said, is it a wide angle or a macro lens?
Got it.
Then you evaluate the context. So if your project is about teaching wound care to patients living in rural areas without running water.
Your framework cannot assume a pristine hospital environment.
Exactly. It can't assume sterile supplies are endlessly abundant. It'll just fail on contact with reality.
I imagine you also have to evaluate the underlying assumptions of the framework itself.
You really do. Let's say you adopt a theoretical model that assumes all adult learners are intrinsically motivated.
Like they're just thrilled to be there and eager to learn.
Right. But your actual real-world project involves teaching defensive driving to resentful teenagers who were mandated by a court to be there.
Oh boy. Yeah, your framework is going to actively sabotage your methods.
Exactly. You also evaluate logic and simplicity. The clinical text uses the analogy of building a house.
I like that. A framework is basically the blueprint drawn before a single ounce of concrete is poured for the foundation.
Right. It shows the boundaries, the load-bearing walls, how the rooms relate to one another. You wouldn't just grab a hammer and start nailing boards together hoping a house magically appears.
But here's the friction point for me. What if I am working on a deeply specific, unique problem?
Okay, like what?
Like I am looking through all the standard literature in my industry, and the perfect blueprint just doesn't exist. There is no pre-packaged framework for the bizarre challenge I am facing at work.
Then you build a hybrid.
A hybrid framework.
Yeah, the clinical sources make a point to emphasize how liberating it is to borrow theories from other fields. You are not locked into the dogma of your specific industry.
So you can mix and match.
Exactly. If you are working on a highly technical engineering project, you might find that the missing piece of your framework actually comes from behavioral psychology.
Or maybe early childhood education.
Yeah. The text gives a fantastic example of nesting frameworks. You can take the PDSA model, which stands for Plan, Do, Study, Act. It's a very rapid, cyclical quality improvement loop.
Right, PDSA.
And you can place it inside a much broader, overarching model for improvement. You can layer an organizational management theory inside a clinical care model.
It is entirely modular. You assemble the invisible scaffolding that supports your specific, unique burden.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say we have done the hard analytical work. We have evaluated our assumptions, we have defined our concepts, the blueprint is drawn, the structural framing is up.
We have a mathematically perfect project triangle.
Right, but a blueprint is just lines on paper. A house with perfect framing but no electricity, no heat, and no people living in it is just a dead shell.
It has no pulse. And this is where projects, even perfectly planned ones, often go to die.
Because they lack the human energy.
Yeah, they lack the necessary human energy to sustain them through the inevitable friction of execution.
Which brings us back to the creative source material, focusing on the emotional craft of writing and communication.
The author introduces this concept of writing from the heart.
Which, I'll be honest, can sound a bit trite at first.
It really can. It sounds a bit cliché until you understand it as an absolute functional requirement for endurance.
Endurance is the key word there. Without a deep, visceral, emotional engine, where do you find the stamina to finish a grueling 2-year-long systemic overhaul?
Or a massive research initiative. Awe prompts that kind of stamina. Great joy prompts it. Even raw rage.
The motivation has to be deeper than just a simple professional obligation.
Right. And the source offers a profoundly moving case study of this. The author discusses the genesis of her book, Another Country.
And the motivation there wasn't just some academic curiosity about aging.
No, not at all. It was born out of intense personal trauma. She describes the grueling 11-month hospitalization of her mother, which ultimately ended in her death.
Just a horrific thing to go through.
And throughout that nearly year-long ordeal, the author was physically and emotionally torn in half. She was trying to care for her own family in one state while desperately trying to be present for her dying mother in another.
She lived with this suffocating ambient guilt for a year, constantly feeling like whatever she was doing, it was never enough.
But out of the ashes of that devastation, a broader systemic realization crystallized.
She looked around and realized that modern culture simply was not equipped to help adult children and dying parents navigate this transition.
There was a massive societal blind spot.
So she took that crushing personal devastation and used it as the fuel to build a structured project.
A book.
Right, a book that could ultimately help thousands of others.
It's what the French refer to as a cri de coeur, a cry from the heart. The author points to Willa Cather's famous assertion.
It's easy to be a writer. You just open a vein and bleed over every page.
It has to be visceral to resonate.
That brings us right back to Anna Akhmatova standing in the snow in Moscow.
Exactly. The fellow woman in line didn't ask her to write a detached sociological report on the prison system.
She commanded her to capture the bleeding reality of it.
The passion is the combustible fuel, but the framework is the heavy iron engine block that converts that explosion into forward motion instead of just destructive fire.
That is a crucial distinction, because raw fire, uncontained, just burns the house down.
Right.
And I want to bring up a fascinating piece of data from the source material here, because it serves as a massive warning sign about relying entirely on personal fuel and personal perspective.
Because sometimes our deep personal feelings, even our core, most cherished beliefs, can act like a thick fog.
They blind us to the actual objective truth of a situation.
The author of the writing text shares a really remarkable story about her experience researching a book on the psychological health and development of young girls.
And she went into this research with a very specific, deeply internalized bias based on her own worldview.
She fully expected, based on her own progressive values, that girls who were raised in progressive, tolerant, liberal families would naturally be the best adjusted.
The most resilient, the emotionally healthiest. That was her internal hypothesis, fueled by her own belief system.
But as she actually conducted the observations, gathered the data, and interviewed these young women, the reality completely overturned her expectations.
And I want to be incredibly clear to you listening to this. We are bringing this up not to take any political, cultural, or ideological side.
No, not at all. The superiority of one parenting style over another is entirely beside the point here,
Right, we are simply relaying the author's discovery to highlight a vital operational rule.
which is that absolute impartiality and hard data must always override our internal biases if we want to create something true.
Exactly. Because what she discovered was that girls coming from strict, conservative, highly religious families were often significantly more emotionally sturdy and self-assured.
The data forced a complete reevaluation of the mechanism at play. Like, why was that happening?
Because, as she discovered, those strict family values and rigid boundaries were effectively acting as a shield.
They were protecting the girls from a highly toxic, hypersexualized, appearance-obsessed pop culture environment.
The strictness was giving them the insulated space to actually have a real protected childhood, which fostered deeper emotional resilience.
The discipline required to let the data win, especially when it directly contradicts your own deeply held thesis, is immense.
It requires profound intellectual humility.
It really does. If you are writing a clinical report, a policy proposal, or a deeply personal book, and you stumble across data that shatters your premise, you have to let it change your mind.
The author actually went so far as to conduct an experiment on herself, didn't she?
She did. She traded her entire news diet and reading materials with her Republican daughter-in-law for a year.
Just to specifically force herself out of her echo chamber and expose her own blind spots.
Exactly. But I can see how this might seem confusing.
I'm actually struggling to square this, yeah. We are essentially being given two contradictory mandates.
How so?
Well, on one hand, we are told to open a vein, right? To write from the heart, to let our raw rage or grief fuel the project. But on the other hand, we are told we must be coldly analytical, completely impartial, and ready to abandon our feelings the moment a spreadsheet contradicts them.
It's a tough balance.
If we are running on pure emotional fuel, doesn't the work inevitably just become a biased, self-righteous rant?
It absolutely can, and that is the exact danger of an uncalibrated project. The author completely agrees that cathartic writing, just screaming your unedited rage or self-righteousness onto the page, almost always bombs with an audience.
It just alienates people.
To solve this paradox, she introduces a concept from the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. He argued that to effect actual lasting change in the world, we must practice what he called a spiritual discipline against resentment.
Spiritual discipline against resentment. That implies that resentment is the default human state when we care deeply about something.
And that it takes active daily training to fight it off.
Exactly. If you write or build a project purely out of resentment toward the opposition, you instantly alienate the reader.
They can smell the hostility and their defenses just go up immediately.
The author also brings in the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, right?
Yes. And he offered a very chilling perspective on the danger of absolute certainty. He wrote that if you have a gun, you can shoot a few people.
Right.
But if you have an ideology and you cling to it as the absolute, flawless, unquestionable truth, you can kill millions.
Wow. Absolute certainty makes you an incredibly unlikable narrator.
Preachiness is fundamentally off-putting.
Because it leaves no room for the reader to participate. Too much confidence in your own purity makes people stop listening.
The most persuasive projects, the most impactful clinical reports, the greatest books, are created by people who present themselves to the audience as curious students, not as smug, infallible experts.
I love that framing of the curious student. It lowers the barrier to entry for the audience.
It really does. If you can write the sentence, I once thought X was the indisputable truth, but now because I observed Y, I have realized the opposite is true, you will instantly capture a reader's trust.
You are demonstrating intellectual honesty in real time.
Exactly. And it leads directly into a beautiful concept the source calls edge habitats.
Oh, edge habitats. In nature, those are the borders where two distinct ecosystems merge.
Like the marshy area where the deep forest meets the open plains.
Or the tidal zone where the ocean crashes into the shore. And those specific borders are where you find the most intense concentration of life, the most vibrant color, and the most extreme diversity.
Because it is a zone of constant friction and resource mixing.
If we apply that to the architecture of your project, the edge habitat is where you intentionally combine unexpected sources and disciplines.
The most catalytic, highly energetic work doesn't happen when a biologist only talks to other biologists.
It happens in the edge habitat between biology and philosophy.
Or the collision between corporate culture and ancient tribalism.
Or, exactly what we're attempting to do in this deep dive, smashing clinical quality improvement texts against the emotional poetry of writing.
The friction between those two vastly different ecosystems generates entirely new insights that neither could produce on its own.
But, having a brilliant, unbiased, emotionally fueled insight born in an edge habitat still isn't enough if you can't deliver it to the end user.
So that's the harsh reality of it.
If we have our invisible scaffolding and we have our perfectly calibrated, curious emotional fuel, we still have to actually package this information.
Right. If you hand a 200-page manuscript of raw genius to a tired executive or a burned-out nurse practitioner, they are going to drop it in the trash.
How do we structure this content for an audience to consume without them immediately suffocating under the weight of it?
This is where we pivot sharply back to the clinical sources, specifically looking at the rigorous architecture of quality improvement, or QI, articles and clinical practice reports.
Okay, let's look at the structure.
The author introduces a highly formalized reporting framework called the SQUIRE 2.0 guidelines.
SQUIRE 2.0. I have to admit, SQUIRE 2.0 sounds like the most bureaucratic, sleep-inducing acronym imaginable. It sounds like a tax form.
It totally sounds dry, but you have to view it through the lens of human psychology.
Okay, how so?
SQUIRE, which stands for Standards for Quality Improvement Reporting Excellence.
Still sounds like a tax form.
I know. But it's essentially an anatomy lesson on how to build a paper that manipulates the reader's attention in a good way and delivers exactly what they need, exactly when they need it, with zero friction.
It breaks down the specific sections of a report.
Starting with the absolute front door, the titles and abstracts.
In our modern, hypersaturated digital world, your title is no longer just a creative label. It is a search engine optimization tool.
It must be highly searchable and brutally informative.
Because think about the end user. The person reading your clinical paper isn't, sipping tea by a fire.
No, they are a fellow professional desperately searching a hospital database at 2:00 a.m., trying to find a solution to an infection outbreak on their ward.
If your title is some vague poetic metaphor like the silent enemy among us, they will scroll right past it. They will never find your brilliant solution.
Precisely. You have to remove all guesswork. The text highlights an example of a perfectly engineered title.
What's the example?
Reducing hospital-acquired pressure ulcers. A quality improvement project across 21 hospitals.
That is incredibly clear.
In 12 words, it tells you the exact pathology, the specific method used, and the massive scale of the evidence. You instantly know if this paper is worth your time.
Once they click past the title and the abstract, they hit the introduction. And the source makes it abundantly clear that the lead-in paragraph is a make-or-break moment.
You have about 3 sentences to convince a busy person not to close a tab.
The text actually breaks down 3 distinct, highly effective strategies for opening a report to grab that attention.
Let's examine those. The first strategy is anecdotal. Instead of opening with a macro-level, dry statistical observation about disease rates, you start with a single, highly specific human being.
Like, Mrs. S., age 52, is brought to the emergency department with severe abdominal pain, a fever of 103, and a rapid pulse. Her past medical history includes a complex surgery for an adrenal gland tumor. As you look at her chart, you realize this is not the seasonal flu.
Boom. You are instantly engaged.
You are practically in the room hearing the monitors beep.
Exactly. The second strategy is called placement in situation. This is a direct psychological trick that forces the reader out of passive consumption and makes them an active participant in an ethical or professional dilemma.
The opening line might be, what would you do if you saw a senior surgical colleague moving between infectious patients without washing her hands?
It creates immediate, uncomfortable professional tension. You literally cannot read that sentence without answering the question in your own head.
You have to engage with it. And the third strategy is using statistics, but not in the boring textbook way.
You use statistics to reframe the reader's immediate reality.
Instead of saying alcoholism affects millions, you say, the next time you attend a neighborhood social event, look around the room and consider this. About 6.2% of the adults standing there with you have an active alcohol use disorder.
It takes a distant, sterile clinical concept and drops it directly into the reader's own living room.
What is remarkable here is the synthesis between our two sets of sources. The deeply clinical, evidence-based writing text and the highly emotional, creative writing text are actually giving the exact same instruction for the opening paragraph.
They are both arguing that the primary goal of the opening is not to convey data.
The goal is to change the reader's breathing,
Yeah.
to make them pause, physically lean in, and decide to care.
That is a stunning realization. changing their breathing.
But let me challenge you on the deeper architecture of the report, the results, and the discussion sections.
Okay, let's hear it.
Getting them in the door with a catchy hook is one thing. But if I am writing a massive clinical practice article based on years of data, how do I present the actual meat of the findings without burying that tired 2.0 AM reader under a mountain of p-values, regression models, and theoretical jargon?
This is a vital distinction. You have to understand the difference between writing for academic peers and writing for frontline practitioners.
Because they have totally different needs.
Exactly. The source notes that for clinical practice articles, which are meant to be read by people standing on the floor in scrubs, waiting to implement changes on their very next shift, you must ruthlessly strip away the complex, dense statistics in the main narrative.
So you just don't include the data.
You provide them in an appendix for validity. But the core text must answer only one urgent question. How can I use this in my own practice tomorrow morning?
Give me a tangible example of how a massive data set gets translated into a frontline instruction manual.
Let's analyze the skin bundle example provided in the text. This was a colossal quality improvement initiative deployed across 21 different Kaiser Permanente hospitals.
Okay, that is a massive undertaking.
Its goal was to drastically reduce the incidence of hospital-acquired pressure ulcers, which are a massive source of patient suffering and systemic cost. SKIN is a practical acronym. Skin assessment, keep turning, incontinence management, nutrition.
So 21 hospitals, that is an oceanic amount of data, thousands of nurses, tens of thousands of patients. How do you report that without it reading like a phone book?
By focusing the narrative of the report entirely on the gritty, frustrating reality of implementation.
So it's about the process, not just the numbers.
Exactly. When reporting the results, they didn't just pat themselves on the back with high-level statistical success rates. The real value of the paper was detailing the exact PDSA cycles, the Plan-Do-Study Act loops, that happened on individual nursing units.
They explained how they actually got thousands of exhausted nurses to change their daily ingrained habits.
They showed the actual plumbing of the project.
I love that. The plumbing.
They published the real-time data logs. And perhaps most importantly, they heavily documented the barriers and failures.
Oh, that's interesting. They admitted their mistakes.
They openly admitted in the report that a major reason for initial failure was simply a lack of appropriate pressure-relieving mattress surfaces in the hospitals.
So it wasn't just a staff education problem.
No, it was a hardware problem that required a $2 million capital investment to fix. They also documented the intense pushback they received from local hospital leaders who were furious about the new administrative reporting burdens.
By focusing on the messy human reality of implementation rather than presenting a sterilized academic victory lap, they gave readers in other hospital systems a highly practical, realistic roadmap to replicate their success.
They essentially said, here is exactly where you will fail, and here is how we bought our way out of it.
That level of transparency is what builds trust. SQUIRE 2.0 and clear, honest structuring gets the reader in the front door and through the introduction.
But as we look at the entire life cycle of a project, large-scale structure alone won't keep them reading paragraph after paragraph.
Right, you can have the perfect NQS framework, the perfect SQUIRE headings, and a deeply emotional purpose, but if your sentences are clunky and lifeless, the reader will still abandon you.
The macro structure gets them in the building, but the micro-level craft of the individual sentences is what keeps them in the room.
And this requires a shift back to our creative source material to examine the microscopic mechanics of precision and subtlety.
There is a profound quote from Tolstoy highlighted in the text.
What did Tolstoy say?
He believed that if a writer could truly perfectly capture the life of any ordinary person for just one single day, capturing every nuance and fleeting thought, that writer would be the greatest writer who ever lived.
Daily life, when rendered with absolute precision, is universally extraordinary.
But how do we achieve that kind of literary precision when we are usually tasked with explaining massive, systemic, population-level problems?
By understanding that the macro is always reflected in the micro.
You achieve precision by choosing what the author refers to as chunkier words. It is about leveraging highly specific tactile images to create an immediate intensity in the reader's mind.
For instance, in your report, you don't say a character drove a vehicle. You say they drove a faded orange VW bus.
Why? What is the psychological difference?
Because vehicle is a sterile, empty category. It requires the reader to do the work of imagining a car. But faded orange VW bus, instantly hands the reader an entire universe of context.
It tells you something specific about the character's socioeconomic status, their era, perhaps their ideology or their lifestyle, all in 3 words.
The generic word vehicle completely obscures all of that data.
The source provides this devastatingly simple example about describing a child's bedroom.
If you write, "It was a typical child's room," the reader feels absolutely nothing.
But if you talk about the specific mundane details, the scuff marks on the baseboard, the half-finished Lego set, and specifically the stuffed green frog sitting on the pillow, you anchor the reader in reality.
And then you realize how the entire emotional weight of that single stuffed frog changes completely depending on the broader context of your report.
Right. If the child who owns that room is healthy and at school, the frog is just a cute symbol of youth.
But if you are writing a clinical case study and that child is in the ICU, terminally ill, that exact same stuffed frog becomes a crushing vessel for the reader's grief.
You didn't change the object, you changed the context, and the specific object amplified the emotion. That is the power of the hyperspecific.
The author also advises using odd, jarring juxtapositions to force the reader to wake up and see a situation anew.
She shares a memory of standing inside an intensive care unit, standing next to the bed of a dear friend who is slowly, agonizingly dying of emphysema.
It is a moment of profound, hushed tragedy.
But just outside the glass door of the room, she can hear 2 nurses casually, cheerfully debating the best pizza joints in town for their lunch order.
That is such an intensely cinematic detail. The profound, universe-shattering tragedy of death is happening quite literally 2 feet away from the mundane, everyday reality of ordering lunch.
Including that detail about the pizza captures the bizarre, jarring nature of the human experience so much more effectively than writing a long philosophical paragraph about the contrasting duality of life and death.
Exactly. The philosophical paragraph tells the reader what to think. The pizza detail forces the reader to feel the jarring reality themselves.
And this leads directly into the core principle of subtlety. The author quotes Anton Chekhov, the master of the short story, who offered a piece of advice that seems entirely contradictory.
What did he say?
He said, "When you wish to move your reader to pity, be colder."
Be colder. I have to push back on that. We spent the entire first half of this deep dive talking about Willa Cather opening a vein and writing from the heart and capturing the bleeding reality of the world. Now Chekhov is telling us to be cold.
It sounds contradictory, but what Chekhov means is that as the creator of the project, you must remain in control of the presentation.
Okay, control the presentation.
You don't need to explicitly declare to the reader that a situation is incredibly tragic, or that someone is deeply loved, or that a systemic injustice is infuriating.
Because if you aggressively tell the reader how they are supposed to feel, human nature dictates that they will resist you. They will feel manipulated.
But if you step back, present the specific, precise, cold details of the situation, and let the reader assemble the emotional math themselves, the psychological impact is 10 times stronger.
They own the emotion because they feel like they discovered it.
This reminds me of the most striking, unforgettable example in the entire text.
Oh, the airplane story.
Yes, the author describes taking a 3-hour commercial airline flight. She watches an older woman board the plane.
And the woman is carefully carrying a large, homemade angel food cake.
And for the entire duration of that 3-hour flight, through takeoff, turbulence, and landing, that older woman holds that cake delicately on her lap.
She refuses to put it in the overhead bin where it might get crushed. She doesn't shove it onto the seat in front of her. She just holds it.
What is truly fascinating here is what the author chooses not to say.
Right. The author observes this and realizes it is the ultimate manifestation of show, don't tell. Without using the word love a single time in the narrative, without ever explicitly explaining the woman's internal state, the author proves to you with absolute certainty that whoever is waiting at the arrival gate to receive that angel food cake is deeply, profoundly loved by that woman.
The image of the cake creates a direct, high-speed emotional shortcut to the reader's brain.
That is the principle of be colder at work. The author doesn't gush about love, she just coldly observes the cake.
The reader does the math, and the realization hits them in the chest much harder than if the author had lazily written, "The woman loves her family very much and wanted to bring them a nice treat."
And this precise mechanics of imagery connects directly to how we utilize metaphors to explain complex framework.
Metaphors are incredibly powerful cognitive shortcuts, but the expert advice here is to be ruthlessly vigilant against clumsy, inherited, or biased metaphors.
The text specifically calls out the overuse of war metaphors. In corporate and clinical environments, everything is a battle, or a frontline, or we are waging a war on error.
Yes. And while it might sound dynamic, not every single project needs to be framed the lens of combat.
It creates an adversarial mindset that might be entirely inappropriate for a project about, say, compassionate palliative care.
The author also warns against hyper-specific sports metaphors.
Yeah.
If you frame your entire global economic report around the rules of cricket, you're going to immediately alienate a massive percentage of your readership who have no idea how cricket is played.
The metaphor becomes a wall instead of a bridge.
The author of our text actually shares a moment of self-correction regarding this. She initially planned to use a toolkit metaphor for her chapter on the mechanics of writing.
It's a very common accepted metaphor, tools the trade.
But she ultimately rejected it. Why? Because when she looked at her actual life, she realized she doesn't use tools. She isn't a carpenter. She doesn't spend time in a wood shop.
Using a toolkit metaphor felt fundamentally fake to her own experience.
Instead, she chose the metaphor of swimming because she is a swimmer. It was a physical reality she intimately understood, which allowed her to extend the metaphor naturally and authentically throughout her work.
The lesson for you, as you build your project, is to find metaphors that are universally accessible to your audience, but remain uniquely authentic to your own lived experience.
Because if it feels forced to you, it will read as completely hollow to them.
Okay, I have to take a breath here because we have spent the last 50 minutes talking about towering theoretical frameworks, the profound nature of emotional truth, SQUIRE guidelines, and the sublime literary beauty of angel food cake.
It's been quite a journey.
But as we pivot to our final segment, there is a brutal, unglamorous reality we have to face. Absolutely, all of this high-minded theory is entirely 100% useless if you lose your notes.
Or if you get your fundamental facts wrong.
Welcome to the grunt work, the messy, physical reality of research and organization. As both our clinical and creative sources point out with brutal honesty, writers, clinical researchers, and project managers are essentially, at their core, just high-level paper organizers.
Let's strip away the romance of the creative genius. I think people envision these brilliant innovators just sitting in a sunlit room, having fully formed, paradigm-shifting ideas flow directly from the cosmos into their keyboards.
The reality is infinitely more mundane and highly administrative. The creative author pulls the curtain back on her highly low-tech, almost chaotic system of organization.
She doesn't rely on massive, expensive software suites. She uses little cheap pocket notebooks that she carries everywhere to instantly capture odd words, overheard snippets of dialogue, or fleeting hypothesis ideas before they vanish.
She uses hundreds of manila folders. She literally uses old cardboard banana boxes stored in her closet to keep years of past correspondence, newspaper clippings, and physical research categorized.
Banana boxes. I love the tactile reality of that. It's so aggressively normal.
But amidst that organized chaos, she also shares a profound tragedy about the fragility of her physical records.
She talks about losing a white leather diary that she kept during junior high school.
It was lost decades ago, and she writes that she would pay a highly unreasonable amount of money to have that physical book back.
Not because the writing was genius, but because it was an irreplaceable, unrecreatable trail into her own raw thoughts as a young girl. When the paper vanished, the history vanished with it.
It is a stark, haunting warning, and it leads to the absolute non-negotiable, concrete mandate of this entire deep dive. You must aggressively back up your work.
The author doesn't just trust the cloud. She prints physical hard copies of her writing at the end of every single day.
She stores digital backup discs in a physical shed on her property, completely separate from her main house, just in case a tornado or a fire destroys her primary residence.
You can spend 5 years building the perfect project, and you could lose those years of your life in 5 seconds to a crashed hard drive or a spilled cup of coffee.
Trust the paranoia on this one. Back it up in multiple physical locations. But beyond just hoarding and protecting the paper, let's talk about the actual mechanics of the research itself. How do we actually gather the raw material to fill those banana boxes in the first place?
The creative source details a deeply intensive process she calls the saturation and immersion method. When she was preparing to write her book, The Middle of Everywhere, which focused on the refugee experience, she didn't just sit in a university library and read detached academic demographic reports.
She completely physically immersed herself in their world. She took on the role of what she calls a culture broker.
What does a culture broker actually do, practically speaking?
It means she abandoned the role of the distant observer. She
Ah,
actively taught 3 different refugee families how to drive a car.
wow.
She physically walked them through the confusing bureaucracy of enrolling their children in local schools. She attended their deeply intimate healing rituals, their community parties, and was even present for a birth.
For 2 entire years, she simply lived inside their ecosystem. And her interview process during this time was not linear. It wasn't the standard academic model of gather all the data, then retreat to an office to write.
It was a constant, messy, iterative loop. She would form a hypothesis, conduct a casual interview in a living room, immediately realize her hypothesis was completely wrong based on their answer, refine the theory on the spot, and interview them again.
Now, I have to raise a massive red flag here. I am struggling to square this methodology with everything we talked about in the SQUIRE 2.0 section.
Yeah, that seems like a huge pivot.
We just spent significant time lauding the absolute necessity of massive, highly structured clinical data sets, tracking pressure ulcers across 21 hospitals, running statistical regressions, proving validity at scale.
How does spending 2 years anecdotally hanging out with just 3 refugee families fit into the ecosystem of serious, rigorous research? Isn't that a massive methodological contradiction?
It looks like a contradiction until you understand how paradigm shifts actually occur. This is where we bring the entire spectrum of our sources together.
Okay, lay it on me.
It is absolutely true that massive control group studies, randomized trials, and 21 hospital data sets are the essential machinery required to push established science and public policy forward. They prove what works at scale.
But the most groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting eureka moments, the moments that create entirely new fields of study, almost always originate from the careful, hyper-intense observation of microscopically small samples.
You are saying the massive surveys prove the theory, but the tiny immersive observations invent the theory.
Exactly. Think about the foundational history of psychology. Look at Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, or Jean Piaget.
They didn't run multiple choice surveys on 10,000 random citizens.
They spent thousands of hours carefully, exhaustively observing a handful of individual patients, or in Piaget's case, observing his own children.
Those deep, immersive, qualitative observations of a tiny sample size generated the foundational theories that completely changed how the modern world views human nature.
So the scale of the research, whether it's 3 families or 3,000 patients, is less important than the integrity of the observation.
Because whether you are tracking 21 hospital systems for ulcer rates, or you are sitting on a worn couch in a living room interviewing a refugee mother, the ultimate requirement, the absolute bedrock baseline of your project, must be accuracy.
Because facts are incredibly slippery things. We misremember, we project, we assume.
They are, and as creators and researchers, we carry a profound moral responsibility to be exact. If a reader, whether they are a tired nurse scrutinizing your clinical report or a citizen reading your emotional memoir, catches you fumbling a small, verifiable fact or misrepresenting a minor statistic, they will immediately and permanently dismiss your entire framework.
Their internal logic will be, if this author couldn't be bothered to get this small, easily verifiable detail correct, why on earth should I trust their massive, sweeping conclusion about the healthcare system or the human condition?
Accuracy is not just about being right. Accuracy is the currency of trust. If you bankrupt that trust, your project dies.
So what does this entire journey mean for you, the listener, as you sit at your desk tomorrow morning, staring down the barrel of your next massive, overwhelming project? Let's pull all these threads together.
To take raw chaos and forge it into impact, you cannot just rely on frantic effort.
First, you must construct the invisible scaffolding, the theoretical framework, and the project triangle to give your work necessary boundaries, defined concepts, and ironclad logic.
But a blueprint alone has no pulse.
Yeah.
So second, you must fuel that structure with the passionate, curious, and rigorously impartial energy of the heart, always remaining humble enough to let the data override your internal bias.
Third, you must package that fueled structure using the psychological mechanics of SQUIRE 2.0, creating titles and introductions that hook a tired reader and offer them realistic, implementable solutions.
Fourth, you must master the microcraft of the sentence, utilizing precise, chunky details and the cold subtlety of an angel food cake to bypass their intellect and strike directly at their empathy.
And finally, beneath it all, you must embrace the unglamorous grunt work discipline of the researcher, immersing yourself in the reality of the subject, meticulously verifying every single fact, and fiercely protecting your notes, even if your filing system is just a stack of banana boxes in the closet.
If we step back and look at the entire massive architecture we've unpacked today, from national quality strategies to the quiet corners of an ICU, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
We talked at length about how precision and jarring juxtapositions, like those nurses cheerfully discussing pizza just inches away from a profound tragedy, are the specific mechanisms that truly capture the complex hidden reality of the human experience.
So I challenge you, look around your own daily workspace or the environment of your current project right now. What seemingly mundane, incredibly ordinary detail are you walking past every single day?
What small friction or odd juxtaposition is actually the hidden key to understanding a much larger systemic truth about your organization or your community?
How might the act of stopping, observing, and precisely writing down that one small detail today become the critical foundation for your next major breakthrough?
It all comes down to the lens you choose to view the world through and having the discipline to document what you see. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep stress testing those blueprints, keep refining the precision of your sentences, and above all, stay endlessly curious.